Let's talk supply chain. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Talk Supply Chain. So, as always, let's start with a question. Shipping tends to be the highest operating expense on your profit and loss statement. So, by how much could you reduce your shipping spend by working with today's guest? Well, what do you think? Let me know your guesses over on social and keep listening because I'll let you know at the end of the show. So today I'm joined by a company that helps you make a promise you can actually keep. And that's turning shipping into a strategic value driver for your business. Well, who is it? Well, it's Shipium. So Shipium helps e-commerce companies deliver their orders fast, free, and on time. They drive cost savings throughout the supply chain that can shift money towards the premium delivery experience that your consumers want, which means great transparency, more convenience, and faster speed. And today I'm joined again by Jason Murray, co-founder and CEO. Jason spent 19 years at Amazon before bringing all of his experience across retail, forecasting, and supply chain together to found Shipium. And today we're going to be talking all about AI. We're going to explore where AI is having an immediate impact on supply chains and the biggest impact it will have in the future. We're also going to be sharing the biggest macro trend that no one is paying attention to and how AI can help. Plus, we'll shine a light on the skills supply chain operators of the future are going to need and how to nurture them now, as in today. So, welcome back to the show, Jason.
Good, great to be here. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. You were on the show a couple months ago, and we had a
Yeah,
great conversation. I mean, we took a
super fun.
closer look at AI, its potential, what AI supported future could look like for the industry. Now, that was episode 491. In case anybody missed it, I hope you didn't, but if you did, go and check out episode 491. Let's Talk Supply Chain YouTube on our letstalksupplychain.com as well. Today, we're going to be carrying on from where we left off because you and I had a lot to talk about. There's a lot to really unpack and discover around AI. You gave us a few hot takes last episode, and I think one of the titles that we put out on LinkedIn was a little provocative, but it really got everybody's attention. And so I can't wait for us to dive in, hear some more words of wisdom from you today. But before we do that, we need to give the stage and give some light to Shipium. So for anyone that's new to you or to the show, can you introduce yourself and Shipium?
Yeah, so my name is Jason Murray, CEO and co-founder of Shipium. I spent 20 years at Amazon, 19 specifically. My career was really heavily focused on kind of the merger of logistics and technology. And so, kind of around 2009, 2010, I took over the supply chain technology stack at Amazon. And it was right about the time that Prime was launching, right about the time that kind of data science was also becoming a big thing in the market. You know, you think Facebook, Google, et cetera, were using it for other means, but we were applying it to the supply chain problem. And over the next 6 years, built out this team called Supply Chain Optimization Technology within Amazon. And really, we were kind of managing all of the decisions that if you do a really good job at forecasting, delivery promise, how you route your orders, what carrier you use to, transportation optimization, you do a good job at those things get faster and cheaper, right? And so my job was really to make Prime affordable using these techniques. I left Amazon in 2018, and really the concept for Shipium was to try to take these concepts and build a company around it that was effectively democratized. So we're going to be able to make these decisions for lots of retailers and give retailers access to those decisions. Over the years, we've evolved to also supporting 3PLs, and now more and more we're supporting kind of B2B companies that have complex supply chains that I feel like are, in my opinion, are going through an Amazonification right now. So
Mhm. Amazonification. You
yeah,
come up with the
uh,
greatest words. How
there
did you
you
come
go.
up with
Yeah,
that one?
yeah, yeah. It's kind of this notion that like Amazon was really good at dealing with this complex multi-source, multi-destination supply chain, and I think
Mhm.
everything is evolves towards that as they get more mature and complicated, right? And so
Yeah.
we're really specialized. Like the more complicated, the better, as far as we're concerned.
Yeah, and we only met, I think, about 18 months or maybe 2 years into your journey with
Yeah.
Shipium. And I just want to take a minute to congratulate you because you've really come a long way with the company expanding into 3PLs. And now we're really diving into sort of another phase of the company as well. And it's been fascinating to watch. And I really appreciate, the time that you give to us here at Let's Talk Supply Chain to be able to help you do that. So.
Well,
Just
thank you so
wanted to
much. I
say that.
think we're very, it's been a great journey. Obviously I love, I'm a builder at heart and I love the process of going through this. Sometimes when you're in the middle of it, like it can be a bit of a roller coaster, but if you do look back over like a longer time span, it's pretty amazing, how many customers we have now versus like, still remember signing the first customer a couple years back. So it's exciting.
So exciting. Well, looking back, right? And I want to
Yeah.
ask you this. What do you think sits behind your success? Like, how do you think you got to where you are today?
I always think like it's important when you think about this kind of stuff to like have a little bit of humility because I do think there's always like these factors that go into it. I mean, I was lucky enough to grow up in the shadow of Microsoft. I had this like kind of natural passion for programming and technology and data and science that was what I wanted to do, and I kind of ended up landing right out of school in the middle, kind of in the tail end of the 90s, right when this stuff was all going to take off. And I lived in Seattle and so all of these things really I feel very fortunate that all that happened. There's a probably lots of periods of time where my interest in data and math and programming wouldn't have gotten me to the same spot, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, um, but I think if you kind of didn't take like, okay, well, what did you feel like made you successful in your career, et cetera? I just think, um, going back to the first point, I think really focusing on being a builder, I think being a lifelong learner, kind of continuing to evolve how I thought about things. I think observation is really critical, like in
Mhm.
terms of looking at leaders you look up to and then trying to kind of mimic their behavior and understanding what they're trying to do, and even asking them like, why did you make this decision? Really, being curious and introspective about what you need to improve. I think there is this kind of art in leading people that you have to develop over time, and it kind of that 10,000 hours thing where you've got to keep developing that skill set, just in terms of how do you connect with your people, how do you scale the processes, how do you do all, how do you keep people motivated? All these things are there's a thing behind it, right? Like there's an art to it,
Yeah.
that you have to develop over time. And I think being really true to that, being a leader, thinking about how to run all that stuff was really critical. And so, I think those are the things in my personality and the way I approach things that I really kind of attribute to my success.
I
But
love that.
I don't lose sight from the humility too, because a lot of things went right for me. Um, you know,
Yeah.
Finishing college when the internet was about to explode certainly tipped the scales in my favor. So
That is true. That is true.
yeah,
But also I think it's, the fact that you are willing to take some risks and to try different things, and you're also willing to pivot when things don't work out. And that's
yeah, for sure.
also a true sign of a leader. I mean, I do the same things within my business, and you pivot quickly and you don't dwell on, you want to learn about why it didn't work, but you don't want to dwell on it. You want to sort of focus and try and see what works and what doesn't work. And I think that really makes you a true leader that's going to make some of that big impact in the industry. So, we're diving back into AI today. And so I want to ask you, like, where are you seeing AI have an immediate impact on supply chains? I know for me, talking to a lot of supply chain leaders, chief supply chain officers, it's not necessarily an impact on supply chain specifically, but on the day to day, where they are summarizing their emails and getting through their emails a lot quicker. Like that's one of the things that is the
Fair.
immediate impact, I think, is just the sheer fact of information that the C-suite and senior leaders have to go through. They're really leaning on AI to help summarize and get them through some of that minutia.
I hope some of those aspects are net positive because I always have the thing in my head that of the there's the meme where the one end person is saying, "Look, I'm able to take a couple bullet points and send a big long email to someone." On the other end, it's someone saying, "I can summarize these bullet points, I mean this long email into bullet points," right? So hopefully there's a net effect and it's not just like a wash, right? But I think it's actually a pretty good place to start is probably information and kind of like dealing with unstructured data, I would say is probably the first place where this it's worked the best. And I think the email is an interesting kind of that's a little more general than even supply chain, but there's a
Yeah.
lot of places we're just seeing where whether you're ingesting invoices, you're ingesting kind of rate information that these are things that for years have been talked about of like, why don't we have an API around them? Well, it just, the sophistication on the other end is not necessarily there. And so being able to bring unstructured data into the system quickly, we're seeing really great success with how we're kind of building our software. And so as we're reading invoices into the system, stuff that we would have had to figure out some way to offshore or build is no longer needed because these things that, reading in information, bringing new information sources into the system, like looking at websites, trying to determine if a carrier is down, right? Like whatever the criteria is, the ability to do that quickly is amazing, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think the second thing that is just kind of on that information vein is this kind of like you're touching on it with email, but it's a summarization, right? So
Yeah.
we have a lot of situations we see where people are basically trying to kind of decode multi-factored issues that are in the system, right? So you've
Right.
got a carrier, a decision, a model, a rule, all of this stuff kind of it culminates to make a decision, right? You got to decide, should I ship? I want to ship from this location or I want to ship with this carrier, right? And so the ability to kind of understand and diagnose that, right? We've always been good at automating it, but the ability to kind of diagnose it or again from point one use new information sources to help with that decision has
Yeah.
just been super critical, right? And so I think that would be like what I would call kind of phase one of this of the first thing to happen in the world was everyone started using ChatGPT. This is like what these kind of basic LLMs are really good at. I think we're seeing those use cases when you apply it to the information in a given supply chain.
Yeah.
So we have native tools now inside of our console that let you ask these questions interactively. That reduces the load on our engineering team to go figure out and answer these questions. But it also just makes the experience better because an analyst can immediately know what's going on as opposed to having to go
Right.
do this. And then the summarization piece
Yeah.
is really trying to diagnose that. I think the third thing that I think is maybe still along that thread of summarizing, right? But
Mhm.
there's so much time that's spent around I want to build this report or I want to like package this up in a way that I want to give it to someone else. And we are just seeing huge gains and like I want to automate this, I need a report on X, Y, and Z to help me make a decision. Please do that. Right.
Right.
I think the
Click.
fourth thing, yeah, yeah, it's exactly right.
You
And
forgot
I
to
mean,
click.
yeah, that was the approach, like the having it pre-canned. But I think they just tend to be dynamic enough that the chat, like kind of the chat interface, makes so much sense for building these things up.
Yeah.
I think the fourth thing, which is kind of starting to come, which is where if you use like coding as a model or even what you're starting to see in more and more of the sales tools around like outreach and stuff is this like taking action stuff
Mhm.
and it often gets kind of lumped in with agents and whatnot and I worse, that's kind of the next thing that we expect to start falling, right? Whereas you have tasks you want to do, or you want to try and run an experiment, and it requires,
Right.
trying a bunch of different things, and getting those things automated, the kind of the automation process is the next big thing that we
Mhm.
expect to start to fall, right? And I think you think of it as you have this army of people available to you to help you work
Yeah.
through this stuff, right?
Yeah, I go
So
back to I think it was the second one you were talking about. Like what is it that we don't know?
yeah.
What are the red flags that I'm not seeing here? that I need another sort of set of eyes. I know that sounds really strange, but
No,
like
that's right.
a
Yeah.
set of eyes to take a look at it. What are the red flags? What am I not seeing? What information do I need in there that's not in there that I'm just not seeing? What am I missing? Right? I think those
Yeah.
are three really key components to this and what makes an impact in supply chains using AI. I think all
Yeah.
four of those that you said, but also that one, because we only know what we know. And if we
Yeah.
have somebody else looking at it, somebody else looking at it,
Yeah.
then that can really help us. I mean, I just used that in a contract that I was looking at, right? It's
Yeah.
like,
I think all these things are just like this is stuff that maybe you didn't have time to do, or it like is
yeah,
limiting your ability to do to like move on to the next step. That's a huge factor, right? The fact that you
yeah.
can automate this or reduce the time significantly just changes the game, right?
Yeah. Well, and you're talking about how it's impacting us now. Like this is what's happening today. What do you think is the biggest impact in the future that AI is going to have? Because like we're talking about AI as it stands in the moment, but obviously technology is changing and evolving all the time. It's actually one of the biggest conversations that I'm having with a lot of professionals is just the speed in which things are changing. What we know now is going to be completely different than what we're looking at and what we need to do or how we're looking at things 3 months from now. So what do you think that looks like? Where's the biggest impact in the future?
I think it is. I think I continue to kind of like frame it around automation. And I just think there's um the amount of things that you can you're at least, let's just say the next year, this current version of LLMs. I mean, there's also like other things happen,
Hmm.
other things will happen also, right? But I think the fact that the kind of this notion and the reason people talk about agents and stuff like this is why it's all coming up is because it's all kind of anchored around um, these automation pieces. And I think it does come down to there's a bunch of things that you can do that you previously couldn't that either reduce your time. So that's kind of like the negative version of this is like job loss or things that I wasn't doing before. But the
Right.
positive side of it is more if I'm not doing that, what else can I do? Right. And
Fair.
I don't I think it's very hard to like, when you're talking about these abundant situations where if I had something that could just automatically do all these things, you're gonna like mentally the way that you approach your business is just different, right?
Mhm.
And I think the first thing I've seen the reason I always go back to coding is because I think it's the most mature. And if you look at like code as a model, like the way people are coding now, and it makes sense because obviously like developers are first going to write develop tools for developers, and so that's the
Right.
first thing to fall. I think the sales tools are now starting to change and be more aggressive. Supply chain finance, these other things tend to kind of be maybe the third rung or the next thing, and that's what but if you look at coding as a baseline, right? The fact that you're acting effectively as the architect and you're just
Right.
telling these things to go build things for you or write test cases for you or do them all at once, have multiple people write code and then compare the results, right? Like all that stuff, the workflows change, right? And I think people that are coding now aren't coding like we were in the 90s, right? And
Right.
I think I brought this up last time, but so when you think about as these tasks start to automate, the workflows that people are going to run supply chains it's not going to be coming from a perspective of like of scarce resources, right? Because the guy with maybe a small team of analysts now is able to do very, very sophisticated analytics because they now have this team of
Right.
agents that can go do all this stuff, right? And I think that just fundamentally changes the game. It's not it's I'm not they're not limited by I have to wait, I only get to we only have time to do one network analysis a year, right? You can run 30 a night, right? And
Right.
so how does that change your perspective on how you approach some of these problems, right? And so that to me is kind of the shift that's going to happen as a result of this. It's just going to be nuts. So
Well, and I love that. And the reason why I'm kind of giggling is that I think about, if they were going from doing one a year and now you're talking about 30 a night.
yeah,
And I think about how everybody is a little overwhelmed today.
Oh
And you
yeah.
just said
Yeah.
30 a
Yeah.
night. And then I'm thinking, like, maybe it's going to be information overload and everybody's going to be a consultant and want to do strategic planning.
Well, I like there's not, I mean, I don't know if I would, yeah, I mean, I don't know if I kind of like feel like that's where a lot of things are going though, because
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
people, the code version of it is you're the architect and it's the builder, right? And
Right.
that's just a different, like I had one developer he's a long, been he's been developing for I'm guessing 25 years or something, right? So he's been at it
Mhm.
for a while. And he just said, "Oh my God, it's like I'm become a manager now," right? Because he's got all these things to deal with and you know, you, they have like humans have their own set of problems, but
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
that you can imagine like you're now trying to make sure that all these things are talking together as opposed to you're trying to do everything, right? and
Mhm.
and I do the other people call these like super ICs, right? And this is the pattern you're seeing more and more of, which is interesting because I think it's kind of like a little bit counter narrative to what we're used to, especially in big companies, which is just people become more and more and more and more and more specialized, right? Like
Right.
that's kind of the traditionally way companies have scaled. And I think there's something really interesting about the fact that like you have people that can go fairly wide and then use these tools to get deep in these different areas. And
Yeah.
it's just going to be a really interesting from that perspective.
Oh,
So yes. Yeah.
it's gonna be a lot of fun as long as people
Yeah.
embrace it and don't, like I said, get
Yeah.
too overwhelmed by what is actually happening. And I
Change
think
is hard for sure.
yeah, and I think part of that's going to come down to how you as an organization or maybe a supply chain leader looking at your supply chain teams and where you might need to do some training or some upskilling in various areas so that
Mhm.
people are comfortable with it, right? And that's part of that change management to really adopt innovation and have your teams given the space to use these tools and come to you with even better ideas, right? Because that's
Yeah.
the whole point
Yeah.
is that it's going to
Well,
evolve
so
how we think about things.
no, that's right. Everybody does like they try it once, it gets something wrong, and then they're like, "Oh, it doesn't work. I'm
I
done."
can't
Right?
do
And
it.
I'm just yeah, and it's like you do have to adjust things, and
Mhm.
and as a lead from a leadership perspective, you need a new culture, right? That's the
Yeah,
that's the thing, and you've got to find some way to reset the culture because if the answer is we're going to keep doing things the way we've always been doing them, like eventually you're going to get out competed. So
yeah, exactly, exactly. Now, on our last episode, you hit us with a bit of a hot take that despite all the buzz, we're actually underhyping AI. So I want to dig into that now that we have a little bit more time because I know you've changed your thinking a little bit around AI. So why do you think we're underhyping it? And are there some common misunderstandings? Are we still a bit scared? I go back to your comment just a few seconds ago, talking about how we need to be able to embrace this and brace the evolution, brace the embrace the technology, but also give our teams the opportunity to try and fail, right? So what are we missing around this? Like the misunderstandings, underhyping AI, how are we not hyping it up more? Why are we not? And people are going to say we are hyping it up because it's all anybody's talking about.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's largely a cultural issue. Like you
Mhm.
have to create space and you have to kind of force the transition, right? And I think in general, which means that there's going to be a dip, right, while people figure out how to do this, right? And I think I always go back to code because I think it's like a representative of I think they're leading, they're ahead in terms of how this stuff works, and
Right.
it's going to keep going ahead, right? But it's always you kind of start with this. I'm going to apply the same. Write me this function, right? And then the thing comes back and it's got something wrong, right? Well, it's earlier. These things are going to evolve. They're going to get better, but also when humans write functions, they miss things, right? But people aren't in that kind of change mode of this is what I want to this is what I need to shift. So I think we're not putting enough energy into kind of fully embracing it. I think people are quitting too early. I think people are and then I think the third thing, which is a little bit harder to explain, but there's also this thing around understanding what it can do and can't do.
Mhm.
And I don't think, at least this iteration, I use the term architect builder very specifically, right? Or,
Mm.
you're the strategic consultant, it's the one writing the report,
Yep.
and whatever framing you want, because there is a limit right now to what they can do, right? I mean, you have to kind of, the human's job is to either get 90% there and do the 10% that's left, or
Hmm.
or make sure that you're kind of guiding it in the right way.
Hmm.
And people, what you see a lot of the failure cases being is like, write me this, right? And it's not exactly what I wanted. And you're going to have to. Usually, it requires some kind of putting it in the right scope that works for what you're trying to do, giving it
Yeah.
the context, getting better at how to do all of those things. All of that muscle memory needs to be created.
Hmm.
But the all of it is, it takes practice, right? I mean,
Yeah.
if you're not focused on how to get organizationally, how do you get better and better at changing the culture around this? You're
Hmm.
gonna it doesn't end well. That's all I have to say about that. But I believe it's very important that, like, one of the mistakes I made early was I was thinking of it as, okay, this is a productivity tool, right? And
Right.
so, that's, so go get more productive. And then I was wondering, like, you know, I had totally decoupled from that. Why are our products not, like,
Yeah.
being enhanced and starting to use AI, right? And it's like an organizational DNA thing. It needs to be
Hmm.
kind of everywhere. And I know some CEOs, they do stuff like they'll wear pins, and like it's every part of their day, right? There's whatever it takes for you to interact with it more at home, interact with it,
Right.
get used to what it's good at, what it's not good at, try to accomplish things with it, understand where it kind of falls down and why, understand how to check it, put frameworks in place like you do with humans, to make sure if they make a mistake, how do you catch those mistakes? How do you
Right.
audit? How do you work through those things? But it's going to take energy. But I am like, no one that puts in that energy is like, oh yeah, it's not, like, there's nothing there. It's
Right.
it's it's you know it's no one I know who's actually putting energy into trying to use this to solve problems comes back and says like I didn't get anything out of it, right? It's always the case that you are going to start finding things that work really well to improve your productivity and your throughput and output, and then
Yeah.
that leads to more things. So
So, and I have a few thoughts on this. I was writing some notes
yeah,
down because what you're fundamentally talking about is how humans interact with each other.
yeah, that's
So,
right.
so they have expectations, and when it doesn't
Yeah,
meet their expectations, they get disappointed.
right.
So, without even realizing it, maybe we're interacting with this as another human being with our expectations and, blame when it doesn't work, right? Or
Right.
when it
Yeah,
works
that's a
too
good.
well, we get a little bit lazy and lax. And then
Yeah,
for
that's
some
right.
reason, for this one other part, it doesn't work. And then you're like,
Yeah.
oh
I've
no.
I've heard it described as like the future is, some futurists have talked about, like, the at least this round of LLMs, you almost can think of it as like different personalities, right? Because
Yeah,
Claude is very good at code. Like ChatGPT has a lot of consumer facing stuff. Gemini is great with images, right? And it's almost like, I want to go talk to my artist friend. I want to go talk to my, like,
right.
but these are all exactly like, oh, I know Claude is really good if it's going to help me write the script for me. So there's kind of this like, it's almost like, how do you start interacting with them in an effective way? But I think that analogy actually works,
Yeah. And
right?
you're building almost like a board of advisors. Like if you think about it, right?
That is the right way to think. That's the right way to think about it. Yeah, it's
But
it's just, yeah,
I go back to your leadership journey and the fact that you were saying that it takes practice. And, it took practice for me. I did some things right. I did some things wrong. Some things kept me up at night. And I've gotten better as I've done it. And I think about speaking to these LLMs or speaking to these agents, speaking to your board of advisors. You have to understand what it means to talk to them. If it was human, you'd have to do the exact same thing. Some
that's
people
right.
don't like your tone. Some people don't like the way you say this, and it's the same
Yeah,
thing
and
when you're
people make mistakes, and
interactive.
you have to have ways of, the organization has to keep going
Yeah.
even if the mistakes happen, right? And
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
that's
yeah.
all part of this structure.
Do you think part of the misunderstandings could be fake news or like misinformation around AI that's sort of spreading? Or do you think we're all sort of on the same page about it because I just wonder, there's a lot of talk about it. There's a lot of people talking about it. Some really know what they're talking about. Some might not. And they're maybe on stages, on panels and things like that. Like, are we all kind of, working with the same information, or you think there's some out there that could be some misinformation that's contributing to the misunderstandings?
I think it probably there's always a natural pushback to change,
Sure.
and for sure, like you're going to bias towards what matches your outcome. I mean, if you think about the, I think for sure. I mean, I think it just there's people that they have been doing things a certain way for a long time, and something new comes in, and it's like the initial take. This is like classic innovator's dilemma, right? It's
Mhm.
like the initial take on it is it's not quite as good, and so then that thing goes off, but it is good at these other things, and people that are finding things that it's good at are going to eventually like then surpass the other thing, right? And I
Yeah.
think this is just a really common pattern in change management, in the way humans kind of absorb things, et cetera.
Mhm.
And but of course, like if you have confirmation, people are looking, they want to hear confirmation that this is not working, right? But I just
Right.
think when you actually dig into the details, it's working. There you can find the stories and the realities of this stuff working in lots of magical ways or all over the place. And so I think, just it's so obvious to me that this is inevitable, right? And if
Yeah.
you're not embracing it fully, you're probably in trouble, right? I mean, that's unfortunately just what it's going to be.
So let's talk about the investment in it, right? Because people or organizations, leaders are wary about making investments. They're making investments today when some of the future potential of this technology is virtually unknown. So, what would you say to leaders about finding the balance between success in the now and how they can really make an impact today versus the future potential? I mean, in my mind, I think it comes down to the partners that you partner with from a technology perspective, but I'm sure you have some other things to share.
I mean, I think there was kind of that big study from that came back and said like 95% of the investment didn't go anywhere, blah blah blah, right? It was something like that. But I think the initial thing was really just more out of the initial kind of wave of this stuff was just more out of panic, right? So board says CEO, you need to do AI. CEO says CTO, you need to do AI. CTO says VP of whatever, you need to do AI. And the guy goes and buys a bunch of stuff, throws spaghetti against the wall, and then that's it, right? And it doesn't go anywhere. So not surprising, right? I think there is work kind of for our conversation that we've just having today is there's work in understanding like where can you find spots that this you have to be thoughtful about where do you first
Right.
try to approach this, right? And my wife is she designs chips, right? She works for Blue Origin, and like I talk to her about this all the time, and she actually found that they use this language that is not it's for specifically for designing chips versus writing software.
Okay.
And she found that like there's not enough kind of training on this language that didn't work particularly well, right? It was okay, but not as good as like people that are developing web applications, right? But the as we kind of like as we're talking through this, what she's figuring out is they also have all these avionics requirements around basically how they test and how they validate these chips, right?
Mhm.
And generating that stuff ended up being like the unlock, right? Because
Right.
because it didn't necessarily solve the main absolute perfect thing, but it solved this problem of I can all the some of like infrastructure around stuff.
Right.
I was able to it was able to help me with that. So net she's more productive, right?
Right.
But it's not necessarily like doing the one thing perfectly that she wanted to do. And that's the way this experimentation works, right?
Works.
You've got to have like the ability to go in and kind of try these new things, like figure out what spaces it's going to work the best in. And I think you see that in engineering. Like people are finding like writing test harnesses, test cases, or that ends up being a big use case. Or in the supply chain, it's what we talked about, like summarizing or auditing information that previously wouldn't have been possible. So maybe
Right.
it's not the absolute core thing, but it's all about finding those slots. And there's work and kind of thoughtfulness to go into that I think needs to happen. And so that to me is what is really the unlock.
Well, and sticking to it, right? Because
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
go into it with a thought like this is what I need to be solved, but it ends up solving for something else, being open to that and not bringing
Yeah.
that bias to the table. I think sometimes we get in our own way.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is a common pattern. I mean, people for years have, some new thing comes out and people want to keep doing it the way they've been doing it, right? And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
and so you're making a call on is as this thing evolves, is there going to be continually more and more opportunity with it? And I think the answer is unequivocally yes, right? So
Yeah.
just there's no way.
Well, and I want to go back to my comment about choosing the right technology partner. Because my next question for you is around how Shipium helps with this, right? Like, how do you sort of hold your customers' hands during the process of looking for that technology to invest in, the success that they're going to see now, but then understanding what the future potential is?
Yeah, I mean, interesting question. I think one way to look at this is there was a narrative in this space that for a while that there would be no software providers because like the big LLMs would just handle everything as they got smarter and smarter, and maybe that happens over time. I don't know, but there is a so in other words, like why not just solve everything with ChatGPT because the
Right,
thing is super smart? Why do I even need Shipium, right? Like that's
right.
kind of the question, not just us, but kind of all SaaS tools, right?
Mhm.
But I think the thing that has become like where you see where it seems to be working for people that are our situation. So we have the data and the automation, like a lot of these processes already set up. And so everything is already kind of organized. All of your data is organized. And so one of our big jobs is just basically putting these tools on top of that to just make it super easy to access, right? So
Mhm.
if you're an analyst and you want to generate a report on your carrier mix over the last 3 weeks and account for accessorials and then build a model for graph in like the what we expect the holiday cost to be or something, that we are in a much better position to do that because we have kind of all of this infrastructure around that. So the first short answer is it's really our job to kind of innovate on behalf of the customer and really start to make this as easy and seamless as possible, right? And
Right.
I think you see this in tools, like it shows up in your mail application, it shows up in your thing, and it's just kind of way more than ever this supernatural interface to interface with this stuff. And so
Mhm.
I think building this into the tools is a critical part of making it seamless and helping people kind of actualize this, right? Like
Yeah.
turn this into something that's useful for them. I think the second piece, though, yeah, and maybe this applies more to some of the more optimization type models that maybe are even a little pre-AI, is people want to understand like how the black box works, right? And so when we build software and when we build these optimizations, we spend a lot of time thinking about like how do you put instrumentation in there to
Right.
get kind of people to understand this is a multifactorial decision. There's weightings coming from here, there's weighting coming from here, and how do you kind of explain it? And then I think even the LLMs themselves can help with that journey of like how do you turn that into something that can be digested by people.
Right.
So instrumentation, transparency, all that stuff is really critical as you're kind of getting people comfortable with these concepts and ideas.
Well, and I think you're right too. I think there's parts of the technology, like it's one of the reasons why we've got chief technology officers, right? There's
Yeah,
a certain component of the technology that not everybody is going to understand and not everybody has to understand. And so there has to be something in between to be able to take what success looks like and translate that into the rest of the organization in a way that they're going to be able to understand so that everybody's on the same page about what success looks like today, but also to structure trust around the technology partners that we're choosing and knowing that they can help take us into the future no matter what that
right,
looks like, because nobody
right,
has that answer
right,
necessarily. We're
exactly. And
all
a lot of it's
working
going to,
towards
yeah,
what AI looks like in 6 months from now, but a year
yeah,
from now, there's some capabilities that we
yeah.
might not even have thought about.
Yeah, and you have to believe, you have to believe a lot of this comes down to you're trying to work with a company that you believe will be able to adjust, with a partner who will be able to adjust as these times change, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's where the kind of human element comes back into it, which is just like, do you trust the leadership? Do you trust how they're handling things?
Hmm.
Do you like what you're seeing in terms of their roadmap? All that stuff is really important as you evaluate someone. If you're working with a company that's 25 years old and hasn't really changed anything, it's changing at a very slow pace, then probably you're not going to get that what you
Right.
need as these changes come, right? So we really try to kind of sell ourselves as being forward leaning, and we invest a lot in making sure that we're kind of staying ahead of these things and making it easy for our customers to gain access to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I want to go into skills because I sort of mentioned it in the introduction. We've talked about upskilling, we've talked about culture. Like, what does that look like? What skills do you think are going to be the most important for supply chain operators in the future, and why? Because I think a big part of this conversation, like we were talking about earlier, sure, is culture, but it's also getting people to where they need to be to not only understand the technology, to be able to utilize it in its most optimized form, but then also be open to adopting more features and things like that as they come through in the future. So what do you think about that? What skills are the most important for operators?
I think you have to build. I think this notion of like curiosity, experimentate, liking to experiment, lifelong learner, open, like kind of that set of skills. Like we've kind of, as this kind of happened, right? I kind of incorporated that into our company culture, right? Which is that unless you're unless you're very curious and
Mhm.
very like, as a human, you should
Yeah,
almost be wanting to try something new every week, right? If you're not doing that, you're probably not going to be very successful at Shipium,
right.
right? And so it's up to people. They can obviously do what they want to do. We cultures are there to set boundaries on what doesn't necessarily mean that anything's good or bad, but it's just that this is what we require, what we believe you need to have to be successful, right?
Hmm.
And so it's been really interesting because the people that are being really successful for AI, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's like not obviously young. It's not obviously. I hear people like trying to you know pinpoint, well, they need to know how to develop code, but not good enough that they're stuck in their ways, or whatever the thing is, right? It's always this kind of strange calibration. But I think really what comes down to that personality trait of like, do you believe, are you really kind of curious and kind of constantly trying to experiment and learn
Hmm.
about how this is going to change, because the rules of the game are changing. And so
Right.
so back to your question, supply chain operators, I do think I think we had a shift from like 2000s to 2010s, maybe. Timelines maybe not exact, but like where the need to kind of be more data oriented started to come into play, right?
Hmm.
And I think the shift that's going on now is you can't, like, kind of the I'm going to blindly follow the same pattern I'm following. That's not going to make you successful as we go through this massive change over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
You need to have this kind of curiosity and this kind of desire to figure out how this stuff works.
Well, and training on how to speak to it, right?
Yeah,
The prompt engineering. I mean, you don't need to
yeah.
be necessarily an engineer, but we
No, I don't
do
think.
need
I
to
think that's
provide
the
those
yeah,
skills, right? We need to be
yeah.
able to
It's it
train people to be able
for
to
sure.
utilize the LLMs in an optimized way. And in order to do that, they need training.
And that's like the magic of this whole thing, though, because we're seeing people that have never um, coded in their life or
Yeah.
built SQL queries or whatever, generating reports for themselves, right? I mean, that's what
Right.
makes this whole thing magical, right? And they're
Mhm.
they're kind of learning it through maybe a different framework, right? But it's like, in some ways, like opening up the aperture of people that are able to manipulate
Yeah.
and deal with data and kind of rules and configurations is amazing, right? Because now it's not this central point of constraint in the organization. lots of people can do this. And I think your question on education is really interesting because I don't think anyone's really cracked that, right? Like I don't think they have LLM class in elementary school yet. So maybe they do. I don't know. But my
They
kids are a little older.
should.
Yeah, they
They
should,
should,
right?
because they're
So
all
so
using
how do you
iPads. I mean, I'm just
yeah,
saying.
yeah, right. Right.
That's so funny. But yeah, no, I think, I think some training or giving your teams the opportunity to use like a chat GPT and just start asking questions, because
Mhm.
as you start asking questions and seeing the response that comes back, I know for me in chat GPT, it comes up and says, do you want me to do this? Sometimes I'm
Mhm.
like, no. Sometimes I'm like, sure. Let's see what you come up with. And so it
Yeah.
actually, by utilizing things like that, it actually changes the way that you ask the question, understanding what's going
Yeah.
to come back. And so I think it's a combination of training, but also letting people play a little bit. We got to get back
Yeah.
to playing.
That's what
Experiment.
experimentation is, right? Because you
Yeah.
don't like, it's what I'm saying. Like even if some of these things don't work exactly as you expected, you're the next time around, you're going to be more prepared.
Yeah.
And also like it's still probably a net gain if you figure out how to scope the thing in the correct way.
Yeah. 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 All right. Well, last question for you. I'm going to get you to, bring out your crystal ball.
Yeah.
I love doing this because the look on everybody's face is like, uh-oh,
Yeah. Right.
don't hold me to it.
Yeah.
I was recently at Inland talking to Paul Bingham, and I was like, so how are your predictions
Mm.
today from what you said last year? He's like, you didn't hold me to them, did you?
Yeah.
So they were all wrong. Anyways,
Yeah.
what can we expect for 2026 from maybe the industry, but also from Shipium? Because I love to sort of see what you guys have in the pipeline and what you're working on.
Yeah. I mean, I think the most interesting thing to me, and I just not to, I mean, I'm just beating the dead horse, but I think the interesting thing, like some of the macro trends, if you look at like the stock market, the S&P 500, and other people have talked about this, but the real gains in the market right now is AI, right?
Mhm.
And I think they're like all of the companies that are gaining have some attachment to AI in some way, right? The startup ecosystem is all driven by AI. So all of this gain is coming out of that. And if you really look at like the GDP, kind of the GDP gain over the last quarter, the majority of it also is coming from kind of AI related things. It's like data center build outs, energy. These constraints are showing up. People talk about them at nauseum, right? About like how we don't have enough energy and what we're going to do, et cetera. So I think what it squarely, there's a couple ways it could go. I think that the the concern is obviously that this is a bubble, and even if this thing becomes a disruptive technology, you're going to hit this bubble. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think the reason I don't is because the fundamentals of these companies are still insanely good, right? I mean, even if you look at OpenAI, which is a relatively young company, if you squint, right, it's very easy to see how this is going to become a
Right.
massive. It's the next one in the group of these massive companies. And so I don't think we have if you look at the internet boom, the fundamentals on the price to earnings and all the numbers were way out of whack. And you don't see as much of that now,
Hmm.
but what it does tell you is just back to the same message. I do think there's going to be the innovation funnel is going to funnel through AI, and that's what 2026 is going to be defined by. And if you're fighting against that, I think it's going to be a really hard thing. And so, I mean, obviously, I like things to go smoothly. So we're going to continue to shift the both the branding and kind of the product mix and my company Shipium around this narrative, right? Which is
Hmm.
just we want to really own the shipping AI space, right? And that's really kind of the mission that the company is centered around. And what that means continues to evolve. See entire rest of podcast, but the point is that I just believe at a macro level that is where the everything is going, right? And so we've got to have laser focus on what does it take to move the needle towards that. So
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you. I mean, I'm in media and I am making technology investments and things like that around AI for my business. And so,
right.
And I say that only to say to everybody else, if you're not, and I am,
Yeah.
there's a bigger conversation that you need to have. And go back and listen to this one. Go and check out episode 491, where we started this conversation. Find out a little bit more about what's working, what's not working. I just did a Thoughts and Coffee on AI with Eric Johnson, and we weren't talking about supply chain companies. We were talking about Taco Bell testing
Yeah.
out voice AI and what worked and what didn't and how humans interacted with it. There is so much information out there for you to be
Yeah.
able to take a look at and make the right decisions for you, or at least get started in testing and experimenting and having your teams play around with it. So, I'm having more and more conversations around AI, but you always give me something a little bit different. I always learn
Good.
something
Yeah.
and I go away sort of thinking about how the industry is changing, like what it's going to look like in the future.
Yeah.
And really, today was no exception. And so I want to ask the audience, did you have a guess at today's big question? Because at the top of the show, I asked you, by how much could you reduce your shipping spend by working with Shipium? Well, their customers see an average reduction around 12% in their first year. And that is massive. When everybody's looking at margins, 12% is where you want to be. So, if you want to modernize your supply chain, turn it into a strategic value driver for the future, head over to shipium.com to learn more. And remember to subscribe, rate, review the show, and check out more content from the best and brightest over on letstalksupplychain.com. We've got incredible guests, innovative strategies, transformative solutions you cannot afford to miss. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today on the show, and to the team at Shipium for making this episode happen. Yeah, so Jason, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. It's always a great conversation.
All right.
I'm gonna want a parking spot soon though.
You're
So
gonna what?
want a parking spot for the show. Like this is I'm becoming a regular. I love this. I want to
Let's
just show up on
do
other
it.
shows.
Let's
Yeah.
do it. I would love that. I would love that. All right. Well, until next time, everybody, I'm Sarah Barnes Humphrey, and this was Let's Talk Supply Chain.